I'll go ahead and get started. I am audible. I can hear myself. My name is Patrick Wiseman. I'm a professor of law at Georgia State University College of Law, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about a course that I've been teaching for a while called Law and the Internet, which I've been teaching on the Internet since the summer of '95, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the course. Being a law professor, I need to start out with a couple of disclaimers. One of which is I'm a law professor. I'm not an expert on instructional technology, and I'm not an expert on learning theory. And so these lessons that I've learned, although I think they do have application in other online contexts, and I am told by people who are more expert than I am in both instructional technology and learning theory, I am told that some of these, at least some of these lessons that I've learned actually do have some foundation in the literature, but my evidence for them is apocryphal or anecdotal. It's not based in theory. The second disclaimer is that this presentation should be viewed as a work in progress for a couple of reasons, and the principal reason is that the course itself is a work in progress. I find myself doing things every semester that I offer it, and I'm now thinking about the 7th or 8th offering of it. Every semester I offer it, I found myself doing something different from what I did before, and always asking myself, now why didn't it occur to me to do that sooner? And I'll illustrate some of those things. I'll also talk a little bit about how I've taken some of these lessons that I've learned from teaching this course and applied them in other courses. This is the only course that I teach that's entirely online, but every course that I teach has an online component, and the online components, how I conduct those online components reflect some of the things that I've learned in this course in particular. Let me just give you a little background on the course. As I say, I first offered it in the summer of '95. That image is rather larger than the screen, but I'm not going to bother to go down and page down and show you the whole image because you've got the basic thrust of the image there. I first offered it in the summer of '95, and back then there wasn't much in the way of web-based course tools, but in '95 and then again when I offered it in '96. And so I started to develop my own, and because I started it, and so I want to say something up front. I am not a programmer by training, but I've done a lot of programming. But I'm not showing you this because I've done a lot of programming. I'm showing you what I will show you, I think, are sort of some models of some things that you might be able to do using other tools. Teachers don't have to be programmers. It just happens that I'm a geek from way back, and so I've decided I'd do some programming. But this isn't about this is largely about the pedagogy, not about the technology. So when I advertise this session as suitable for people with no technological background, I really did mean that, and I hope. And so hold me to it. If I start going off down some geek path, pull me back. Tell me that's not where you want to go. I would, by the way, just like to get a sense of the audience. How many of you are teaching faculty? Most. How many are technical folks? Quite a few. That's kind of interesting that you would come to a session that I said, you don't have to have any technical. How about library folks? Right. Okay. This is what the course homepage looked at in the summer of '96. I had thought when I first, when I started to prepare this presentation, I had thought that I had originally used Mosaic, but obviously I didn't, because Mosaic doesn't support frames, and this page has frames in it. I downloaded the very latest version of Mosaic, which is very old, and it didn't support frames. The course page in the summer of '96, the home page, doesn't look a whole lot different. There's a lot more content over here on the left. One of the features of this course is that all the student papers get put up online. One of the requirements of the students is that they write a paper about a legal issue arising on the internet, and that they provide it to me in HTML format, and it gets posted up there on the website. So the homepage actually hasn't evolved a whole lot from summer of '95 to this is from fall of 2000. But what's going on behind it has evolved a great deal. Over the years, I've used a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, I just sort of went out there. When I first started doing this, there weren't available sort of anything that was particularly dedicated to courseware, so I just went out there and downloaded a whole bunch of stuff and tried everything and used it in the course. Now one of the things I've done is simplify it. The software that I've written I call the Web System, which stands for Worldwide Web-Based Bulletin Board System, although it's evolved way beyond that. In fact, that software, if anyone's interested, I'm not going to go down a geek path, but just for a moment, that software is delivering this presentation. This is a completely web-based presentation, and that software is delivering it. So now I'm using a lot less than all the stuff that I started out using. The substance of this course has always been online. We do meet face-to-face at the beginning of the class, in the first course, in the first class, right, and we talk to each other about it, and we have a couple of social meetings during the course of the semester. Any of you who are familiar with Atlanta are probably familiar with Manuals, which is the sort of a local pub, and we hang out there for a couple of sessions during the course of the semester. But the only purpose of that is just for students to get to know each other and get a look at each other. The substance of the course is entirely online. I said at the outset I'm not an expert in learning theory, and I'm not, and so I may be using a term of art inartfully when I describe this course as constructivist, but I'm told it's constructivist in the sense that the students really create all of the content of this course. I provide the online environment in which they place the content, but the students create all of the content of the course. It's student-centered in the sense that the students decide every topic that's going to get our attention during the course of the semester. I don't dictate anything about that. I just tell them at the beginning of the semester, go out and figure out what are the interesting legal issues right now on the internet, and then we get together in a live chat session to brainstorm about that, and then they decide which ones they want to talk about, and I don't dictate anything about that. So it's entirely constructivist and student-centered, which means that it's different from a lot of other courses, although I think some of the things that I've learned from this do have application in my less constructivist courses. Like my first year real property course, it wouldn't be a really good idea for me to walk into the first year real property course and say, take a look at the West Nutshell and decide which of these topics you'd like to think about over the course of the year. That would probably be completely and utterly irresponsible of me. I don't think it's completely and utterly irresponsible in this context, although you might disagree, I suppose. Some changes of this course have been reflective, that is in the sense that I've actually given them some thought, and some have been reflexive. The software changed, so I used something different. So some have been reflective and others reflexive. These lessons are not in any particular order. I had intended to bring a handout, and I neglected to do that, so let me tell you what would have been on the handout. It would have told you that there are 9 of these lessons coming, so you can get a sense of, as we move on, saying, God, he's only on lesson 3, and look at the time. So there are 9 of these lessons coming. And at the end of the presentation, since this presentation is a website, the last page of the presentation shows you the website, and in case you're interested in reviewing it on the website, each lesson has a little pop-up which sort of summarizes some of my commentary. If you're interested, if you have any interest at all in revisiting this presentation, it's available for you to do that. As I said, they're in no particular order except the last one, and it'll be obvious why the last one is the last one, but other than that, these lessons are in no particular order. And the first is simplify. Simpler is usually better. Here's an example. Back in '96, for our synchronous meetings, that is real-time meetings, I used a whole variety of stuff. I used everything that was out there. We used Internet Relay Chat, which some of you may be familiar with. I installed a Moo on our web server, and we used that for a while. We did some web-based chatting. And I did that, part of the purpose of the course at the beginning was, I think that there's a sort of an interesting marriage between the medium and the message. That is, that law and the internet, it just sort of seemed natural to try to teach it on the internet. But I was inviting my students early on to help me play with the technology as much as to sort of master and discuss the substance. I'm not asking them to do that so much anymore. I'm not so much asking them to play with technology as just to play with the technology as I am asking them to concentrate their attention on the substance. So I've simplified that. But there is a danger of oversimplifying. This was the Spring 98, one of the pages behind the home page that went to the class links. And I don't know if you can read that, but there's a discussion list archive, online classroom, my virtual office, class calendar, class schedule. What the heck is the difference between the class calendar and the class schedule? I mean, I know, but nobody coming to this page might have a clue. But in other words, this is too simple. I mean, it's easy enough to go to the links, but it's just oversimplified. So now the course homepage. I'm teaching it this summer, so I'll just show you what the summer page looks like. If I can master this remote mouse. This is what the page looks like this summer, it's still simple, but there are descriptions of what you're going to find when you go to each of these links. My colleagues will tell you that my websites tend to be functional and they don't have whiz-bang stuff on them. I don't use Flash and I don't use animated graphics and I don't use all that stuff. They tend to be sort of text-based, which some people think is boring and I just think is respectful to people with low bandwidth. But so don't oversimplify. In other words, don't let the technology get in the way of the pedagogy. I did that early on. I think I did let the technology get in the way of the pedagogy because I tried to do too much and use too many different tools, and I used all kinds of different things. And I think that the difference of all the different interfaces that people were trying to master, while they were also trying to do some substantive work, just detracted from learning the substance. Although students did tell me that they found it to be a skills course in the sense that they'd learned how to use a lot of internet technology, but that wasn't exactly what I had in mind. So. Use the right tools. This is contentious, but I think that chat tools are not very useful for very much. I think there's perhaps a reason they're used for chatting, which is arguably a relatively trivial activity. But I do find chat tools and it may have something to do with teaching style. My teaching style tends to be a very conversational teaching style. That is, I don't tend to be sort of very controlling in the classroom. My classroom tends to be a fairly free-flowing conversational style, and if you take that into a chat room, if you're not exercising control over it, then you're going to lose control over it. So I find it very useful for brainstorming, and we use this. Obviously, what you see there is just me chatting with myself. That's an autodidactic chat where I'm just talking to myself, just to give you an example of what the chat tool looks like. But I do find it very useful. As I said, early on in the semester, we get together using this chat tool and brainstorm about the issues that people think are going to be worth spending time discussing over the course of the semester. And I find it very useful for that. I don't find it very useful for trying to convey content. And I think most people just sort of run out of steam in a chat context, maybe an hour, 15 minutes into it. A very interesting thing happened at the beginning of the summer semester. We met for this chat to brainstorm about the issues that people wanted to discuss, and I was doing it from home. And my DSL connection just went south on me. I just lost it for about 45 minutes. And the students were still online chatting, and I got back online after about 45 minutes, and they had only just noticed that I wasn't there. I'd been gone for 45 minutes, and they were still chatting away, and as I logged back on, they were just saying, is Wiseman still around? I think for delivering content, discussing issues, working on hypothetical cases and so forth, I think asynchronous tools are better than synchronous tools, and I'll show you the early example of how I did this and how I'm doing it now. One thing that I've learned, by the way, is that I need to archive better. When I was preparing this presentation, at the time we were using Majordomo, which some of you may be familiar with. There's a listserv program, and there are tools that you can use to save the messages contributed to that list to a website, and that's what this is. And I had to dig around in my old Windows 3.1 machine to find this page, but I did. I found it. what we did here was that this is a monolithic archive of the entire email discussion that went on during the very first course. And of course I had to figure out a way to try to get people to separate topics so that when people came to the archive it was usefully searchable for the topics. And so what I asked people to do, I had them use these codes in their subject lines so that at least when they came to the alphabetically sorted archive they would find that the administrivia was in one place and the discussion of ethics of legal advertising on the net was in another place. But it was part of the problem with that is that it relies on user discipline, and these are students we're talking about. So you can't rely on user discipline. So I don't do it this way anymore. We now have a web-based forum. This again using the same software that I developed that's delivering this presentation. It also delivers forums. And so now what we do is each week we set up a separate topic-specific forum which has its own email address to which the students can do it entirely by email, or they can do it on the web. Whenever anybody posts something to this forum on the web, it gets distributed by email to everyone, and they can respond by email, or they can come to the web. In other words, it's basically what this is basically a dynamic archive of an email discussion list, because they can do it at the website. In other words, make sure that the pedagogy is driving the technology and not the other way around. I mean, earlier I was letting the technology drive the pedagogy too much, and I think it's important to let the pedagogy drive the technology and not the other way around. Don't teach. Well, there's a sort of an odd thing to say in this context, although since mine is a constructivist course, it makes sense for me to say don't teach. Make students do all the substantive work, and they do. In my class on law on the internet, they do all of the substantive work. I will very, very occasionally intervene if I think they're getting something, if they're getting some law wrong, but it's very, very rare. Partly because, I should say, when I first offered the course on law on the internet in the summer of '95, I didn't know anything about law on the internet. So I couldn't teach it. I just gave them the environment in which they taught themselves it. Because I wanted to offer it as a way of using the technology to teach a course, but I didn't know anything about it. And now everything I know about law on the internet I've learned from my students. I won't say I don't know anything about law on the internet anymore. I know quite a lot, but only because but I've learned it all from my students. Make the students do all the substantive work. One thing that people have observed when they add an online component to their course, or if they do an online course, is that they're working harder than in any other course. And that's true. You will be working harder. Don't think that these tools are going to save you time. They won't. You'll be working harder than in a standard class. Partly because, as someone was saying in a session yesterday, your students expect you to be available. If you're available to your students by email, they expect you to be available round the clock. And sometimes I am. I mean, sometimes I'll respond. I'll be sitting in front of a TV and be, online, and it'll be midnight, and the student will send me an email, and I'll respond to it. That's a risky thing to do because they expect it. They come to expect it. Then I tell my students in the very first class, I'm not going to teach you anything, but you're going to learn a whole lot. And that's absolutely true. I don't teach them a thing. They teach it all themselves. But don't make the mistake that I made fairly early on of having the students manage the process as well. I'm going to describe briefly to you. This is the class schedule from, I think, maybe an offering in '97, I think. And you'll notice there's a link at the top of this page that says Edit Schedule. I wrote, and you can ignore the fact that I wrote the software, but I wrote this piece of software that allows you to stick a link in any document on your website, and if that link is there and it meets certain other criteria, it becomes an editable document, an online editable document. And I created that solely for the purpose, as is the case with all of these tools. I created all of these tools to save myself some time. I created that solely for the purpose of enabling students to edit the schedule online. When you've decided what topic you want and you've formed into groups, then come on here and choose a date and enter yourself in the schedule. Because I thought, I don't want to be managing the schedule. I'll have the students do it. Well, that was imposing too much of a demand on them. I shouldn't have had them managing the process as well as doing all the substantive work. So now I manage the process. This is, again, exactly the same software that's delivering the forums and is delivering this presentation is also delivering the syllabus. Let me just show you what the current syllabus looks like. As I said, I'm offering it this summer, so this is what it looks like at the moment. We've got one forum ongoing at the moment, the Napster case forum, which is in progress. We've got, actually, since it's a summer school, we always have two forums going on at the same time. One starts on Monday and one starts on Monday at 6 and runs to 5:59 the following Monday, and one starts on Thursday at 6 and runs to, so they're thinking about two things at once, which they seem to be managing okay. The point of that is that they're color-coded, whether it's behind us or going on right now or coming up in the future. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. But I maintain this schedule. They don't. I mean, the point of this is that I'm not requiring students to manage the process as well. I'm now managing all the process things. Also, since, I mean, this is probably more true of this because it's a constructivist course, exercise professorial restraint. As I say, I very rarely intervene in the discussion. I will occasionally make a contribution, but not very often. And I tell them it's your course, I just make it possible. And I think that an observation we made there is sometimes with the right technology, the pedagogy sort of takes care of itself. I mean, I've given them an environment in which they're doing all of the work, and they really do good work. I mean, every now and then I have to tell them, and this I think is true of any course which has an online forum as a component of the course. Every now and then I have to remind them, we're lawyers here, not pundits. So I want you to be telling me legal stuff. I want you to be making legal arguments. I want you to be bringing law to bear on the issue. I don't want you just to be telling what your opinion is. And every now and then I have to remind them of that. But other than that, they really do teach themselves to a very great extent. How am I doing for time? Yeah. Okay, good. Take risks. I think taking risks is actually something that teachers should do, especially if you're like me and rather long in the tooth and you've been doing it for a while. It's important to take risks just to sort of shake things up. And in the online environment, there are interesting ways that you can take risks. You can try things you've never tried before. And my view is that you probably can't do your students much harm, if any. If you were teaching medicine, that might be different, but we're teaching law, so we probably can't do them much harm. And don't be afraid to look or even be stupid. And I'm going to give you an example of me maybe either looking or even being stupid. Some things will blow up in your face, but it's worth trying. You just won't do those again, right? You know, I told you I created this editing tool that would allow students to come in and edit a document. And it occurred to me that what I'd done when I did that was actually kind of interesting. But what I'd done is created a context within which I could have them consider the question, what rules govern your conduct in this environment? In other words, a very interesting question about law and the internet. What norms govern our conduct on the internet? And I'd sort of, by creating this editable space for my students, I'd created a sort of microcosm of the internet, if you like. So I asked them to think about what norms govern your conduct in this environment. And the first thing when they clicked on the editing link to edit this page, I said, whatever else you do in here, I don't care, just don't use the blink tag. You're probably familiar that Netscape has this tag that makes text blink, and it's an abomination. There's absolutely there are maybe very rare appropriate uses of the blink tag, but for the most part it's an abomination. So I just had a little comment a commented out line in the text, so don't use the blink tag. Where as a protest for you establishing rules on a page about the lack thereof, and there's this great big blinking text. So my reaction to that, and it was an interesting reaction, but because I reacted strongly to that because I thought that the blink tag is an abomination. So I made it technologically impossible to use the blink tag. If you put a blink tag in there, it would just get stripped out. Actually, at one point I made it technically impossible to say blink, but that's not what I meant to do. That was just a programming error. So I corrected that and just made it technologically impossible to use the blink tag. Now that was a very interesting reaction to this rule breaking in this environment, and it's one of the ways in which the powers that be are likely to respond to rule breaking in the internet at large, right? Once IPv6 comes along and every appliance has an IP address, the powers that be will be able to control which IP address is accessible to which other IP address. And we can't assume that they won't try to do that. Now, so I felt a bit, so I had this technological solution, right? I made it technologically impossible to blink. Well, no, I didn't, because the following semester a student came along and I told them about this page and how said blinking is now technologically impossible here, and so a student entered a link to a blinking GIF, proving that there were a very interesting lesson, right? Proving that there are ways around. I mean, and that's a very interesting lesson about the internet itself. What norms govern our behavior? If the powers that be say, well, we don't want you doing that, then somebody's going to figure out a way to do it anyway. So I sort of felt a bit silly after all that, but I did also think that I'd learned something interesting. The problem, of course, was that having once intervened that way, I'd sort of screwed up the experiment, and I just had to leave it and let them get on with it. So be willing to lose control. Or as the unfortunately late, great Douglas Adams would say, don't panic. Douglas Adams, of course, invented the first PDA. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was the first PDA. I should say he imagined the first PDA. Don't reinvent. Use available applications if they're suitable for your task. Be willing to live within the constraints of packaged course tools, just to show you how irritating the blink can be. I don't believe that for a minute, and anybody who knows me knows that I don't believe that for a minute. I think that you should, and I think that teachers especially should reinvent, because you shouldn't be willing to live within the constraints of course tools. If your university system, as ours, has adopted WebCT as its delivery mode for courseware, you should say the heck with that, and you should push the limits. You should push the limits, because teachers are a creative bunch, and we will think of doing things, we will think of things that technology could do that programmers aren't going to think about. It is never going to occur to a programmer to do some of the things that teachers would say, it would be really cool if I could do X. And programmers are generally not going to think of that because they're not thinking pedagogically, they're thinking about technology. So I think teachers should reinvent. I'm not going to stay on this particular lesson a long time just because it's more technical than pedagogical, but I do think that it's useful for teachers to push the limits of whatever technology they're using, because I do think you gain a deeper understanding of why something's useful if you push it as far as you can push it. So pedagogical innovation, it may not be a necessity, but pedagogical innovation can drive technological innovation, and should, because we are going to be creative about teaching. I said the lessons are in no particular order, but this is arguably one of the most important of the lessons with respect to teaching courses online, especially if it's a 100% online course, or if you're in an environment like Georgia State, which is a commuter environment, which means students see each other in this classroom for the time we're together, but then they go off to their various. They leave campus. It's a commuter campus, and they leave campus, and so there isn't a lot of interaction on campus. So it's important to try to build community, give students a sense that they're part of a shared project. So it's important that you provide ways for students to get to know each other, even if they're not going to get to know each other sort of within the context of the class. As I say, with the Law and the Internet class, we meet face-to-face a couple of times during the course of the semester, just so that people can get a look at each other. Get them to get to know each other online too. Give them opportunities to ask them to introduce themselves in the class forum. One thing that we do is provide Facebooks. This is the Facebook from the fall 2000 version, which has links to their email addresses underneath each, so that they can at least get a feel. And the Facebooks are automatically generated based on class roll and our database of email addresses. Of all the things that I've done technologically, my faculty think that the Facebooks are the coolest thing. I don't know why that is. I mean, they are useful, and when you set them up, you can set them up so that you can produce stamp-sized pictures if you want to, so you can stick them on your seating chart. I mean, so it is kind of useful. This is the current one, and I'm showing it to you just because it has an extra feature. You can now check, and this I did is everything I do in order to save myself time, but it turned out that it happened to be useful for others too. In the Law on the Internet class, for example, I have students form into groups, and I sometimes need to communicate with that particular group. I come to this Facebook page, click on and you'll notice there's underneath each name there's now a checkbox for the email address. I'm not doing this very well because I'm not used to this. I won't try to aim so precisely. There's a checkbox under each name. If I've got a couple of students who are in a group, I check on that. I check under their names and then click on email checked students, and it pulls up the Netscape Composer with those addresses in it, which is sort of a useful thing. Something that I don't think would occur to a programmer to do, but that occurred to me to do because I wanted an easy way to be able to communicate with a subset of my students. So of course, once it occurred to me to do it, I had to write the program that did it. Reflect on the process in public, in the context of the forum. Just talk about how it's going and give and get continual feedback. This is something this is also. I mean, I said that some of these things I've taken back to my other courses. This is something that I have taken back to my other courses. I have a link on the course homepage, and then I have it on all of my course homepages, to what I call the continual evaluation, in which I ask students to evaluate the course. That is, tell me what's working, what's not working, and give me any other comments you have. I think it is the case that in most law schools, students get to fill out a student evaluation at the end of the semester. And if it's a one-semester course, whatever they've told you that might be useful to you in terms of how you teach it next time is not of any use to them. Right, because they're gone. And so even if you do change your behavior in response to student evaluations, it doesn't do any good for the students who fill out the evaluations. So I have them do this during the course of the semester. Tell me what's working, what's not working. And I now do this in my first year property course. And it's anonymous. They fill out the form anonymously. And students tell me what's working and what's not working. And I tell them, and I do this, when they fill this out, I get an email with the comments on it, and I will either send that email, forward that email to the class forum with a response to it, or I'll respond to it in class. I'll tell them, someone complained that I talk too fast. Well, I'm not going to change that behavior, and let me tell you why. And so I'll try to slow down. And if I'm talking too fast, raise your hand and say, Wiseman, you're going too fast. And in other words, I change my behavior in response to what I think are legitimate observations, evaluative observations about the course. So that's something that I've taken from the law. And I did it originally in the Law on the Internet course just because I had no clue whether it was working or not, because I never saw anybody, right? So I mean, they were all engaged in it, but I couldn't tell if they were getting anything out of it or not. So that's why I originally created it. But I've taken it back now to all of my classes. My associate dean once said that was a very courageous thing of me to do, which I suppose it was the first time I did it. But students are honest with me about what they say. The other thing is so that's a way for them to give me feedback. This is a way for me to give them feedback, and this one I'm going to move down so you can see the whole page. This is the same forum that I told you about before, the Napster forum from last fall. I create a link on this called participation statistics, and one thing it does is it gives them all feedback, at least about their participation rate in the particular forum, not about quality of participation, but it gives them some notion about the quantity of their participation relative to others. It also has this discussivity measure, which is something that I just made up. The discussivity measure of a forum is 1 less the number of threads over the number of messages. where the number of messages is just the total number of messages posted and the number of threads is the number of top-level messages. If the number of top-level messages is the same as the number of threads, then 1 less that is 0 because you've got no discussion at all, you've just got a whole bunch of top-level messages. If the ratio is, the ratio then could approach 1 if you've got 1,000 responses to a single message, then you've got a higher measure of discursivity. It's a very rough measure, in other words, of whether they're actually discussing stuff or whether they're just posting stuff. It's a very rough measure, but I think it gives them some feedback on the quality of the discussion. One thing I'm doing this year, this semester, is I'm also having them evaluate each forum as it comes to an end, and I'm going to see if there's any correlation between their satisfaction with the forum and its discursivity. And I have no idea whether there will be, but maybe there's a publication out of it. I mean, maybe there is, I don't know. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about whether there's... So they're giving me feedback and I'm giving them some automated feedback, but that's all automated. I'm not doing any work to generate that particular feedback. Hold students to community standards. I talked a bit about we're lawyers here, not pundits. That's one kind of community standard. But the other is that they need to treat each other with respect and they have a responsibility to contribute to the discussion. Only once in the entire time that I've offered this course has a flame war ever erupted, which is actually fairly surprising, I think. Because one of my observations about these forums that I now use, obviously in Law on the Internet I use a different forum for every topic, but in all of my classes I have an online forum where subsequent discussion can go on, and it's frequently obvious to me that they've forgotten that I'm there, because they say things that I don't think they would say in the classroom. So it seems to me they've forgotten that I'm there, but they're still, for the most part, treating each other with respect. I mean, and it's very rare for a flame war to erupt. And when it does, I douse it rather quickly and just remind them to be respectful of the opinions of others. And especially in my first year course, I say there's no such thing as a stupid question in the first semester. Then in the second semester, I suggest there might be such a thing as a stupid question. Where do those standards come from? Well, just netiquette, and it's a good question. And do you need to lay them out ahead of time? Maybe so. I mean, I haven't done that. I haven't really said at the beginning that but maybe it's because I'm in Atlanta. I'm in the South. Most of the students are Southern students. I mean, I have no idea whether that has anything to do with it at all. Whether they're just generally polite, or I mean, would it be different somewhere else? I don't know. Credit students with their contributions to the community work. I mean, remind them that we're all engaged here in a task, in a shared task, and so when students make particularly good contributions to the community work, credit them with that in public. And in your classes where the online forum is just a component of the course, but it's a traditional face-to-face course and the forum is a component of it, one of the ways that I do that in those courses is I will, if a student makes a particularly interesting contribution or asks a particularly interesting question, I'll bring it to the class and I'll say, Mr. Smith's raised this question and I think it's an interesting question. Mr. Smith, would you state again what the question is and let's talk about it some. So that's a way of letting them know that it counts for something and that it's an important feature of the course. Accommodate diversity is an important thing to do. Now, accommodating students with disabilities is not something that I learned in this course, but it is something that you ought to do. And I came to teaching from a background in advocacy for people with disabilities. So that was something I knew before I ever got to teaching in law school, but it's an important thing to do. Make sure your web pages are accessible. And let me just, do I have time? Yeah, I think I do have time, just to say a little bit about what I mean by that. Well, no, maybe that's too technical. Yeah, that's too technical. But in particular, don't have JavaScript pop-ups like this one. JavaScript, many sight-impaired users, for example, use Lynx, which is a text-based browser, to translate text to voice. And if you and JavaScript just doesn't work in Lynx, so it won't have any effect. So and certainly don't put any essential information in a JavaScript pop-up like that. But the more important, what I mean sort of a bit more importantly by accommodating diversity is not so much accommodating students with disabilities as accommodating technological diversity. And LCD here doesn't, LCD means lowest common denominator. And this may be a bit technical too, so I'll go through it fairly quickly. If you use email or have an email option available for everything asynchronous, my web-based forum sends out email, so the students who email is the lowest common denominator. So accommodate students who just want to do the whole thing by email. And use plain text email, not HTML. Minimize the bandwidth of your web pages. Because you can't, maybe it's Suffolk. I don't know what you can assume about your student population here. Maybe everybody's required to have a laptop, and it's, and they're all required to have 56k modems. But you can't assume that your students have high-level technology. So minimize web page bandwidth. Don't use graphics unnecessarily. Use low-resolution graphics. How many of you have run across web pages which have question marks where they ought to have quotation marks? Do you run across those all the time? I run across those all the time. They're generated by a Microsoft product which uses a character set outside the standard ASCII character set. And if your browser is using the standard ASCII character set, those things come up looking, well, it doesn't render properly. So use the standard character set where possible. And this is just too self-referential, but this is what this page looks like in links. I went through this entire presentation in links to make sure that it worked. And one of the things I said about making sure that all web pages are accessible was make sure that the most likely link to be clicked first or selected first is the first link in the page. Because when I first started doing it, you'll notice that the most likely link to be linked here is the one at the top left-hand corner that takes you through the presentation. Originally, it was in the top right-hand corner with my name, which happens to link to my email address, in the top left-hand corner, which means I had to skip a link every time I came through, and it occurred to me, well, that's not a very user-friendly thing to do. So I moved it over to the left. But that, as I say, that's just too self-referential. So I'm into Gödel, Escher, Bach stuff, so self-referentiality is sort of cool. Lesson 8. Automate. Automate those things which can be automated. Giving group feedback, and I already showed you this, so I'll go past it quickly. But the giving the feedback, participation rate, discursivity measure, that's all automated. I don't do anything about it. That's just generated from whatever's being contributed to the forum. So giving group feedback is something that can be automated. And again, I'm offering these things just as models of things you might do. I mean, I don't know if WebCT can't do that, and you're using WebCT, then you need to tell your WebCT support staff that I need WebCT to do that. I know you can get all kinds of data back from WebCT, but I don't know whether you can get data back that's useful to students that gives them information about how things are going. Showing passage of time on the class schedule. I showed you that a moment ago. I think if I do have time, I do. I wanted to show you briefly. This is my legislation syllabus from this summer. Yes, I am teaching 2 courses this summer, and yes, I am nuts because they don't pay me enough to do it. But I am teaching too. I wanted to show you this because I'm doing things with this syllabus beyond what I've ever done with the syllabus software before, and I just thought it might be interesting to see it. I decided this is an example of me taking a risk. It might not be a risk for others, but I had concluded about my own teaching that I was being too didactic, that I was telling them too much and not engaging them in conversation too much as much as I really wanted to. So with legislation in particular, I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to post my class notes on the web, and I'm going to ask them to read those class notes before they come to class, and these are just my notes about that particular reading. That's something that I don't ordinarily do. I wouldn't do on paper, frankly. But I do it here. They can see when it was last modified, so if they want to print it out, which of course they all do. We're not saving. Don't think you're saving paper here. You're not saving any paper at all. You're just redistributing the mode of Tree's destruction. That's all we're doing. We're not saving any paper. Actually, I even print them out myself and write notes on them before I go into class. So I'm not even trying to save paper in this particular instance. That's the thing. That's an example of of doing more with a syllabus than you could possibly do on paper. They can search the class notes. I won't actually do it, but there's a thing where they can go to search the class notes, and then in order to get back, I'll just close the whole thing down. So that's an example of stuff that you can do with the pedagogy. There is driving the technology. There are things that the technology is doing there that I wouldn't even think about doing on paper, but that it's useful to do online, I think. And then my students seem to appreciate having my class notes up there and appreciate being able to search and all that. The risk of doing something on the web is that every now and then things slow down. The next thing that's coming up is about randomly selecting volunteers to participate in class. I wrote a little program that randomly selects from the class list 6 people, 4 of whom will be on call, and they get an email. An email gets sent to the forum at the beginning of actually a few minutes after midnight every Sunday night. So Monday morning they have in their email the list of the 6 randomly chosen students who are going to be called on that week. That's not something... No, don't tell me my server's down. Using previously cached copy instead. Well, it's a good thing I went through the whole thing before then, isn't it? Hello? Yes, indeed. Yeah, what do you do when the technology doesn't work? Well, you hope that you either have a backup or that your memory is good enough that you can remember what else was coming up. I was also going to be talking about things that you shouldn't automate. Don't try to automate everything. Lots of things can usefully be automated. And in fact, you can automate things that... because things can be automated, you will do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. There's no way that I would, on a daily basis, go to my class syllabus and change the background color on each element, on each part of the table, to reflect the fact that this class was over and another one was coming up. Right? I mean, there's no way that I would do that. But because it's automated, I can do it. So you can do things that are automated that you might not otherwise be able to do. Or that you wouldn't bother to do. It's not so much that you couldn't do them, but I also allow my students to, we seem to be back, retrieve their grades by email. I just create a simple file that has exam number and grade, and they come to this site and they fill out a form and they get their grade returned to them by email. I'm violating college policy when I do that, because we're not supposed to release our grades until everybody's graded in. So I make it very clear to my students. And of course, their associate deans here are saying, ooh, I wish you wouldn't do that. But I make it very clear to my students that just because I get my grades to you within about a week of your exam, you need not to be going to your other professors and saying, well, Wiseman's got his grades in, where the heck are yours? You need not to be, I tell them specifically not to do that. But anyway, they can retrieve them by email. So so again, I've taken myself out of the loop. I just create the file, I just do it in a spreadsheet and dump it out into a tab-separated file, and they just retrieve it by email automatically. So I've taken myself out of the loop. And I wouldn't be willing to talk to all of them to give them their grades, but I'm perfectly happy for them to have their grades. My theory being that if I know their grade, then there's no reason why they shouldn't. Again, randomly selecting volunteers. This is the email that goes out and says the following 6 students have been chosen at random and will be called on, and the first 4 present will be called on in the following order. Generating email distribution lists and Facebooks from class roles and various databases. I've already showed you the Facebook, so I won't do that again. But we also, the forum, the subscription lists or the distribution lists for the forums are also generated from that same data. It's an imperfect system, but we're improving it. Don't try to automate everything. I don't think you can automate giving individual feedback, probably. Grading student work. I've put a query after that because there has been some rather interesting recent research, specifically with law school exams, suggesting that software can grade law school essays and is at least as reliable as professorial grading. Well, frankly, if they can get some software to do that and attend faculty meetings, then that's what I'm paid to do, right, is grade and attend faculty meetings. So technology enables pedagogical innovation. And there are some things that I'm doing here with technology that I simply wouldn't do but for the fact that the technology enables me to do it. And the final lesson, reflect. And as I said, there's a reason that the final lesson is last for a reason. Ask yourself what works, ask your students what works, and keep doing it. Ask yourself and your students what doesn't work, and, well, stop doing that. Well, what do I mean by what works? What I mean, my definition is a completely operational definition. This is the form that students fill out, the evaluation form. They tell me what works and what's working, what's not working, and give me comments in addition to that. I think I need to be more precise about that in some contexts. For example, in my real property class, I need to be asking them things like, did you get life estates this week? I mean, I need to be asking them, in other words, more specific questions about, this is what I was trying, by the end of this week I hoped that you would understand X. How do you feel you're doing? Or explain it to me in the forum, and so that then I can go back and correct stuff. But in the law and the internet class, that what works, what's working, what's not working, works quite well. What works may be measurable, and I've started to measure some things, as I said, the discussivity and student satisfaction in the forums. This is something I did quite a while ago, which suggests that maybe there's some correlation between participation in the forum and final grade. I mean, it trends a little bit in that direction, at least. But although, as I told my students, maybe both of those reflect an engagement with the material. Maybe, in other words, maybe one isn't the cause of the other, but they are both reflective of the fact that you're actually engaging with the material. That was just, by the way, just a way of telling them to engage with the material. So, those are the lessons virtually learned. I think I'll leave it right there and take any questions, since we have just a few minutes left. Any questions? I always feel when I do this thing.
Were there any concerns about security? I mean, with all this stuff? I mean, I know it's just straight HTTP, and anyone can smooth your traffic or, get the grades where you're sending out emails and all that kind of stuff.
It's all password protected.
Well, I mean, it's only password protected so far unless you use SSL certificates and all that, right?
Right, yeah. No, we're not on a secure server. We could put it all on a secure server. At the moment, it's all password protected, and I will confess that HTTP password protection is about as secure as a key under the mat. So yeah, so it's protected to that extent.
Have your students brought up concerns about that?
No. And then the grades, the retrieval of the grades, it specifically says it's an honor code violation to retrieve anybody's grade but your own. Every retrieval is logged by email address, name, exam number, so that I can review it to make sure that people aren't retrieving grades that they're not entitled to retrieve. The software that sends the exam grade number, exam back, checks against exam number, and so it's not super secure, and it's not. I mean, it's people. I can't imagine that anybody is so interested in law school grades that they'd be sniffing our packets. So, you think? I mean,
I've never experienced anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine.
But certainly that's a big concern. I work at Stanford, and everybody's saying that they're so worried about.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't have students, send their social security number this way, or so. In fact, the Facebook, our student, the student pictures are from their student IDs, and they're saved in a directory that's not web accessible, and the files are called social security number.jpg, and so that's protected against I create a random link into that so that that's opaque to the person who pulls out the Facebook for exactly that kind of concern. And the Facebooks are only accessible on campus. I mean, I just lied about that because I just showed them to you. But for everyone but me, the Facebooks are only accessible on campus. Any other questions?
Is there a number of students that you're more comfortable working with in a WebCT environment than working with in a normal?
Well, I don't use WebCT, but in web courses. I cap law on the internet at about 24. I've had as many as 30. I did, when it was as many as 30, I did have some students suggest that maybe I could have divided them up into smaller groups and have them working in smaller groups. And I said, you mean in double my work? have 2 courses running at once? But maybe that might have been a fair... I mean, that's a suggestion that I should keep it capped at 24. It works with 24, but much bigger than that, and it does get a bit cumbersome. Partly because I require them to, or I strongly recommend that they make at least 2 substantive contributions to the forum that's going on each week. That means every student in the class is receiving at least 50 emails related to this course, and that's a lot of email to deal with.
I'm concerned about the accessibility issue also, and how does somebody who's not technical like you are make sure that what we create is available through links or some other text-based?
Well, you download links, which is available for every platform, and you look at it.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's one way to do it. That's one pretty good way to do it. Right. You download links. www.links.org. LYNX.
Okay.
And it's available for every platform. I think it may not be available on the Mac. It used not to be available on the Mac, but it's available on every other platform. And so you just download it, and I think the safest way to do that is download it and look and see how navigable it is. One of the things that's particularly important is when you use tables, you need to make sure that or actually links now handles tables better than it used to, but you still need, when you do tables, you need to make sure that your content makes sense from top to bottom of the source code, because links reads it from top to bottom of the source code, which means that if your tabular data doesn't make sense from top to bottom, it's not going to make a lot of sense to someone who's using links. Although, as I say, links now, the latest version of links seems to be doing a better job of that.
You've obviously put a whole lot of time into this. The reaction I've had from most of my faculty when discussing this is that since it's not recognized for tenure, why should they invest the amount of work that you put in this?
I would strongly recommend that they not invest the amount of time that I spent in this until they have tenure. That's as simple as it. Because it isn't valued. I mean, unfortunately, this kind of work isn't valued. Although I have had my provost at the university level, partly because my dean is fairly supportive of it, my provost at the university level, when I had post-tenure review recently, I was frankly worried about post-tenure review. I was thinking I haven't actually published anything in quite a while because I've been devoting all my spare energy to doing this stuff. And the provost called what I had been doing scholarship, which pleased me a whole lot because it meant that he recognized the value of this. But for a lot of people, the time you spend on this, it isn't highly valued at the moment, and especially when it comes to tenure and promotion decisions. It isn't highly valued. So I don't know what to say. Don't do it until you're in a position to do it.
Patrick, this seems like this would be a good course to bring in experts, people who are practicing in the field. Have you ever thought of any ways of doing that as part of the web?
I have thought about that, and I haven't acted on it. One of my students one time did do that, got someone to come in and contribute to a discussion. So my students have initiated that, but I have not. And it's fairly easy to do. I mean, all they need to do is just sign in on the forum, and I can make that available to them, and they can participate in it. My students have initiated that, but I haven't. Well, time's up. Thank you.